Thanks. I'm proud to be introducing this bill on behalf of People Before Profit to make it mandatory for private rented accommodation to achieve a minimum B2 building energy rating, or BER, standard by the end of 2030. A phase-in period is allowed in the legislation so that landlords can incrementally upgrade their properties if they wish to a minimum D2 BER by the end of 2026 and a minimum C1 BER by the end of 2028. Limited exceptions are provided for BER exempt properties. The bill includes important provisions that prohibit retrofitting from being used as a grounds to terminate a tenancy or to increase rents. These are both banned under the bill to ensure that no tenant will be evicted or have their rent increased as a result of retrofitting. It is crucial to draw a line in the sand on this now to prevent rent evictions being used by landlords to drive up rents, as has been used in other countries. I want to thank the Irish Green Building Council for initially suggesting this idea, and also Friends of the Earth, who have been very supportive, very active on this issue, organised an eye-catching event in support of the bill outside the Dáil earlier on today on a very appropriately cold day, showing what the reality is for many renters in our country. I also want to thank Diana in my office for doing a lot of the work on the bill, and Friends of the Earth will be emailing TDs to encourage them to support this bill. The reason that this private member's bill is necessary is because the government has failed to implement its own commitment in Housing for All. It said a minimum BER for private rental property will be introduced where feasible from 2025. This failure is not some oversight on the part of the government. It's part of a deliberate policy of reneging on and abandoning previous commitments in relation to both the climate and the cost of living. Evidence for that is that no revised version of that promise appears in the new housing plan. Retrofitting is often and correctly portrayed as an environmental measure, but its most immediate impact is to dramatically improve people's comfort, quality of life, their health, by making their homes warm and cosy. We're now into the first real cold snap of the winter. Hundreds of thousands of families across the country who are renting from private landlords are facing a bitter choice between paying a fortune to heat poorly insulated homes or cutting back on other essentials like food, or suffering in the cold for months, wearing coats, hats, gloves, indoors, going to bed early so that they can get in under the covers. I went back and looked through my emails of what renters have previously sent me about this issue. I could give some examples of what ordinary people are going through in winter in one of the richest countries in the world. Quote from one: I'm currently in a rental property covered by homeless HAP. I've got 2 small kids. My firstborn is 2.5 and he suffers with asthma and bronchitis. My secondborn is 4 months and suffers with bronchitis too. The property I'm living in is not suitable to be living in with 2 small kids. There's mould all in the bathroom, in the sitting room and in my little boy's room. It's also damp. I've done everything you can to think of to get rid of it, and it keeps coming back. There's very poor ventilation and the house is so cold, even if I have my heating on, my gas bill is costing me a fortune. I'm constantly back and forth in the doctors, spending a fortune on antibiotics for myself and my 2 boys. I've been in contact with the landlord, I've tried everything, but no one seems to be listening and wanting to help. I'm at a loss at this point. Being in this property and seeing my boys so sick is really putting a strain on my mental health, and knowing nothing is being done is really exhausting. Another tenant writes, I moved in 2 years ago and the letting agents / landlord have been ignoring all the issues since then. I've had a revolving door of contractors through, probably at least once a month, sometimes 4 or 5, but nothing ever actually gets done. I've paid for my own report to be done and there's 33% moisture in the walls. I've been told that the landlord has no money. The water gathering on the roof is normal. He has 30 properties that are in the same condition. We need to get all of them first. I find it a bit concerning that this seems to be an issue across his whole portfolio. I cannot keep up with the bills as there constantly needs to be fans and heating running. Something has got to give. I can't go on living like this. It's all too much. I'm embarrassed of my living conditions, even though they're not my fault. I cannot have visitors over. I feel very isolated. This is not a home, it's a shelter. It's in distinct contravention to my right to dignity. A third renter says, I'm currently renting from an inattentive landlord. There's a list of constant problems due to the dated property which I'm left fixing myself. My eldest suffers from asthma and is constantly sick from the worsening mould all over, especially bedrooms. My mental health and anxiety is at an all-time high due to living conditions. A fourth renter writes that she has been, quote, recently diagnosed with sarcoidosis, a lung disease that can be aggravated by damp and mouldy environments. That's just the tip of the iceberg of the misery that is caused by living in poorly insulated homes with no minimum BER standards. Ireland has one of the highest rates of excess winter deaths in the European Union because people cannot afford to properly heat their homes. We know that children living in cold homes are more than twice as likely to suffer from respiratory problems like asthma. The private rented sector is much worse for this than owner-occupied homes because landlords don't have to live in the conditions that they expect tenants to put up with. 4 in 5 rented dwellings have a BER below B. Around 45,000 have very low energy efficiency of E, F or G. Another 24% have a D rating. It's even worse for HAP properties, which have the lowest ratings of all. Half of them have a BER rating of D, E, F or G. And according to the CESO, more than 1 in 5 renters have had to go without heating, compared to 6% of people in owner-occupied housing. It's due to a combination of the sky-high cost of rent, the low energy efficiency of rented properties, and the fact that tenants, on average, are much poorer than homeowners and are forced to pay much more to heat their homes. In the year 2025, it is simply unacceptable that landlords are charging people extortionate rents to live in substandard conditions dangerous to their health. It's even more outrageous that the state is standing over that by subsidising these slumlords through HAP. It's also unacceptable that this human misery comes at such a high environmental cost. It doesn't just affect tenants. It's driving up carbon emissions and overheating the only planet we all have to live on. Retrofitting the private rented sector would benefit everyone. The Minister for Climate, Energy and the Environment, Darragh O'Brien, is over in Brazil at COP30 as we speak. Yesterday he told RTE that, quote, we are heading to 2.3 or 2.5 degrees. That will be disastrous and may be irreversible. He said that, quote, Ireland and other countries have shown how we can start to transition out of fossil fuels. We are doing it. But to set the roadmap for a fair, equitable and just transition while phasing out fossil fuel usage is critical if we're to try to bridge that gap. Well, if he means that, how does reneging on the government's commitment to bring in a minimum BER standard for the private rented sector in 2025 fit into that roadmap? It doesn't. It's just rhetoric to cover over retreat from any commitment to our legally binding climate targets. Every day that is wasted on this is a day longer of wastefully burning fossil fuels to heat drafty, poorly insulated homes. To avoid catastrophic global heating in our lifetime, we urgently need to phase out fossil fuels and switch to 100% renewable energy to power all of our energy needs, including heating. And we need to reduce our energy usage at the same time. Retrofitting is one of the few policy measures that ticks both of those boxes simultaneously. It's a no-brainer environmentally and a no-brainer from a just transition perspective. Renters collectively would save over €500 million a year on their energy bills if their homes were retrofitted to a B2 standard. According to the government's new National Energy Affordability Task Force, retrofitting saves each individual household between €750 and €1,120 a year. The only reason it's not happening is because tenants are the ones who would benefit, and landlords are the ones who would have to pay. An ESRI report earlier this year estimated it would cost between €7 and €8 billion to retrofit private rented properties to a B2 standard. This was portrayed as unaffordable for landlords by comparing small landlords' assets with retrofitting costs. It goes without saying that corporate landlords, big landlords with multiple properties and hundreds of thousands of euros a year rolling in rents could easily afford to retrofit. But what the ESRI report left out was any calculation of the grants and tax breaks already available to landlords for retrofitting. It was an incredible exercise in propaganda seized upon by the landlord lobby groups to say they could never afford to retrofit. But if we look at the grants and the tax breaks available, we find that the finance gap for landlords is far smaller than the headline figures. Landlords are entitled to the same retrofitting grants as owner-occupiers, so they can get half the cost of a deep retrofit paid for by the state and 80% of the cost of an attic and cavity wall insulation. On top of that, retrofitting expenses are tax deductible for landlords at the higher rate of tax, up to a maximum of €10,000 for two properties. According to the ESRI, the typical financing gap for small landlords of a €25,000 retrofit, their savings less the cost, excluding all the grants and tax breaks that they're entitled to, is €14,000. Once you include all the grants and the tax breaks, that gap is gone. If landlords don't want to use their savings to pay for retrofitting, low-cost loans are available, and the interest on that is tax deductible too. Landlords also benefit financially from retrofitting because it does permanently increase the value of their property. Yet despite all of that, too many landlords just can't be bothered to retrofit, even though they have the resources to do it and even though it's in their long-term financial interest. And that's because landlording is a passive, unearned income stream. Landlords own an asset and count the cash that rolls in from it. They're not used to having to do anything to actually earn that income. So organising a retrofit seems onerous to many of them, even if it means that their tenants will have warm homes, even if it means that their tenants will save a whole bunch of money, even if it's the right thing to do from the point of view of our climate. I've no doubt that that goes for many of the landlord TDs sitting in this stall. It will be interesting to know how many of them have retrofitted their properties, including the big landlord TDs and ministers like Robert Troy, Sean Canny and Michael Healy-Rae. They negotiated the programme for government and left out any mention of a minimum BER standard out of it. Retrofitting is something a lot of landlords won't do unless they are forced. That's what we need to do. That's what the bill does by legislating for a minimum B2 standard by 2030, the same date by which we are legally bound to reduce our overall greenhouse gas emissions by 51%. If a landlord still doesn't want to retrofit, after all of that and the grants and the tax breaks available, then they can sell the property with the tenant in situ to someone who will. We think that should be the local authority who can convert the property into public, social or affordable housing. We think this should go together with a mass programme of councils buying up HAP properties, of retrofitting them, and that will be transformative, not only for the living standards of thousands of the lowest income families across the state, but for reaching our legally binding climate targets. We think that the state should properly fund the councils, not the snail's pace of retrofitting of council housing stock that currently is taking place, but to do it rapidly. It can't be done in this bill because it would cost the state money, and we're not allowed to bring forward bills that will do that. It's no use continuing to target retrofitting grants at better off homeowners like the government has done to date. Most of the worst insulated, leakiest, coldest homes are either in the private rented sector or our social housing. That's where the focus of retrofitting should be between now and 2030. It's where the maximum benefit is for quality of life, for health, for the climate and for people's pockets. So I eagerly await hearing what the government is going to do in terms of this bill. I hope that they will not be opposing it. We'll see.
Thank you, Deputy. And I'll call on Minister O'Sullivan to deliver his 15 minutes, Minister.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle, and thank you, Deputy Murphy, for introducing this bill. I have to say, Deputy Murphy, I agree with quite a lot of what you have to say. You said retrofitting the private rental sector would be good for everyone. I agree with you on that. You talked about 100% renewables being the target. I agree with that target. I think that's what we should be aiming and striving for. The conditions that your constituent who wrote you described are not good enough and shouldn't be supported, and certainly in terms of provision of HAP, anyone in that situation, the landlord should not be supported in that regard when you consider what they were going through. But I don't believe that this is the way to do it because of the other impacts that would have, especially in terms of the rental sector and the provision of accommodation, especially with the deadlines that you've indicated within the legislation. And you know, I often hear the opposition quote the ERSI when it suits their argument, but you can't just disregard it and label it as propaganda when it doesn't suit your argument. And I will be I suppose, going into more detail in terms of what the RSI report did and the impacts on that further into the speech. In the Programme for Government 2025, Securing Ireland's Future, the Government has set out its commitment to making Ireland's buildings more sustainable and energy efficient, reducing reliance on fossil fuels and lowering energy costs for households. More specifically, in the Government's new housing plan, Delivering Homes, Building Communities 25 to 30, published last week, there is a commitment to examining policy measures to incentivise increased energy efficiency in the private rental market. This action is aimed at both improving the quality of housing stock available to rent and contributing to meeting our overall national climate targets in relation to emissions reductions. It aims to increase energy efficiency and help to alleviate fuel poverty, protect tenants' health and improve comfort levels in rental homes. I note that the main objectives of this bill as initiated are to require residential rental stock to have a minimum BER rating of D2 by December 2026 and C1 by December 2028 and B2 by December 2030. The Government understands that the bill is a genuine attempt to improve the position for people currently renting property in the private rental sector and appreciates the progressive intentions underpinning it. While the intent of the bill is clear and the objective of improving the energy efficiency in residential properties is a worthy one, the Government is, however, not in a position to support the bill and has taken the decision to oppose it. Any proposed changes of this nature must be given very careful consideration, and it is the Government's view that the bill, as drafted, would have serious unintended consequences. Despite its positive intentions, the bill is highly likely to have a detrimental and disruptive effect on the supply and availability of a large number of rental properties. If implemented as proposed, it would render a significant number of current rented dwellings unsuitable for letting in the private rental market. Earlier this year, the Economic and Social Research Institute, or the ESRI as Deputy Murphy referred to, published its report exploring investment requirements for energy efficiency upgrades in the residential private rental sector. The report is publicly available on the ESRI website. This study was commissioned by the Department in order so that we would have the independent information needed to further our understanding of the level of investment needed to upgrade energy efficiency levels in the private rental sector. The RSI report found that 4 in 5 rented dwellings currently have a BER rating below B. That would equate to over 260,000 properties out of a total of 330,000 dwellings in the private rental sector, and that's using the 2022 figures. The report estimates that over 45,000 rented dwellings have low energy efficiency ratings with BERs of E, F or G. Under this bill, they would all be unsuitable for renting from the 31st of December 2026 with the introduction of the minimum D2 requirement unless appropriate retrofit works were undertaken by landlords. A further 155,000 rental units would be unsuitable for renting with the introduction of a minimum C1 requirement by December 2028. An additional 66,000 units would be impacted by a minimum B2 rating by December 2030. In all, some 266,000 private rental units would need to have their energy rating improved by December 2030. The report estimates that the aggregate cost of upgrading the housing stock of residential rental properties to a B1 or B2 will be in the region of 7 to 8 billion in 2023 prices. It found that the average cost of retrofitting would be €30,200 based on 2023 prices. The report also found that nearly 1 in 2 landlords would have insufficient own funds to cover the €25,000 investment, and some are likely to have difficulties obtaining the finance. While the report highlights issues in respect of the ability of some landlords to invest in energy retrofits of their residential properties, it states that willingness to invest may be an ongoing challenge and minimum BERs may lead to a reappraisal of the attractiveness of investment and a divestment by some owners. The consequences for the private rental market of this could therefore be very significant, with the potential for thousands of existing landlords to exit the rental market. This would reduce the supply available for tenants in a market that is already seriously constrained. The exit of properties housing social housing tenants in receipt of HAP would likely result in a significant increase to presentations to the homeless service and increased demands for homeless emergency accommodation. It would also reduce the supply of properties for prospective HAP tenants, which would also likely lead to increased homeless presentations. Corla, I think it's important to point out here that there are a range of government supports in place to improve energy efficiency of accommodation in the private rental sector. In Budget 2026, we announced a record funding of €558 million for Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland residential and community energy upgrade schemes. This is an increase of €89 million on 2025's budget allocation to support the delivery of the Natural Retrofit Plan. As part of Ireland's National Retrofit Plan, the Government launched a new package of supports targeting homes that were built and occupied pre-2011. These supports, which have been made available to non-corporate landlords and approved housing bodies to improve the efficiency of their rental properties, include the National Home Energy Upgrade Scheme, which provides generous grant support for private landlords with higher supports available for AHBs. The Better Energy Home Scheme, which provides support to landlords for step-by-step retrofits. Private landlords can also receive support to upgrade their properties under the Community Energy Grant Scheme. 80% grants are available to landlords for attic and cavity wall insulation, which are low-cost measures that can be installed quickly and cost-effectively. A tax incentive is also now in place to encourage small-scale landlords to undertake retrofitting works while the tenant remains in situ under Section 32 of the Finance Act 2022. This measure provides for a tax deduction of up to €10,000 per property against Case 5 rental income for certain retrofitting expenses incurred by the landlord or unrented residential properties for a maximum of 2 rental properties. Budget 2026 extended the tax incentive for a further 3 years to end in 2028. The Home Energy Loan Scheme, launched in 2024, enables homeowners, including non-corporate landlords, to borrow €5,000 to €75,000 at significantly lower interest rates to complete a home energy upgrade. The Department of Climate, Energy and Environment, together with the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, continually keep grant schemes under review, including terms and conditions, eligibility criteria and rates, and take account of the relevant factors such as demand, research, innovation and evolving technology. I would also like to take the opportunity to assure the House that the Government is committed to ensuring that a stock of high-quality accommodation is available for those who live in the private rented sector. The standards for rental accommodation are prescribed in the Housing Standards and Rented Houses Regulations 2019. They specify requirements in relation to a range of matters such as structural repair, sanitary facilities, heating, ventilation, natural light, fire safety and the safety of gas, oil and electrical supplies. Responsibility for the enforcement of the regulations in the private rental sector rests with the local authorities. My department's policy of setting private rental inspections targets for each local authority and providing ring-fence exchequer funding to help them reach those targets is working and has resulted in significant increases in inspection and compliance levels across the private rental sector. This reflects a concerted and focused effort by my department, working in close partnership with local government. Inspections have increased from an average of 20,000 a year in the period of 2005 to 2017 to over 49,000 a year in 2022 and 63,500 inspections in 2023, and all-time high of over 80,000 inspections last year. Preliminary data for the first 6 months of 2025 shows an increase of over 5% on the same period last year. There has also been an increase in exchequer funding being made available to support this work. My department will provide €10.5 million to local authorities this year to help them meet their private rental inspection targets. Let me conclude by once again thanking Deputies Coppinger and Murphy for initiating this bill and to you for facilitating this discussion. Given the potential unintended consequences of this bill and its potential serious impact on the private rental sector, the Government has taken the decision that it cannot support the bill at this time. And just to expand a bit further, I suppose what the figures also highlight is there are too many properties in the private rental sector that are at too low a BER rating. I guess the reason the Government is opposing the bill on this occasion is the timelines being outlined in terms of achieving those higher BER ratings. We feel, and the ESRI report backs that it would result in the loss of a significant amount of private rental accommodation from the market in a time when so much time is dedicated in this House to debating the lack of housing provision, the lack of accommodation provision right throughout Ireland, leading to some of the figures that we talked about a while ago. So for that reason, we are opposing the bill.
Thanks to the Deputies O'Brien, Hearn and O'Gorman for their support and speeches. I'm obviously very disappointed, not shocked, given I've seen the oral responses we've had over the last couple of weeks by the Government's response. I mean, the Minister says that he agrees with the aim that renters shouldn't be living in cold, damp, mouldy accommodation, but he doesn't agree that this is the way to do it. But let's look at the reality of the Government's policy position and how it's moved. You've gone from a position of housing for all, where you said, not me, not us, not the Irish Green Building Council, you said, government position was to say, a minimum BER for private rental property will be introduced where feasible from 2025. We're almost at the end of 2025. Fast forward to the launch of the new housing plan, and it was repeated multiple times there by the Minister. The government will examine policy measures to incentivise increased energy efficiency in the private rental market. I mean, it means it's meaningless. We'll examine policy measures to incentivise. You're talking about throwing in a few more carrots when the problem is we need to regulate here. We need to enforce minimum standards. And so, in whatever about you personally, presumably you personally don't like the fact that 1 in 3 people living in rented accommodation are in forced deprivation. Presumably you personally don't like the fact that hundreds of thousands of people are going to bed cold tonight in poor standards of accommodation in rented sector, both actually the state's rented sector and the private rented sector. Presumably you personally don't like any of that. But I say, as a government, I don't think you care. It's a landlord's government. This is a landlord's government. You read the housing plan, you see the agenda that has been pushed over the past year in terms of accelerating the increases in rents, making rents go higher, go faster. You see all the talk of the closing the viability gap, and already they're making profits of €50,000 a year for every property that is developed. You look at the VAT cuts, handing over €300 million to, in this case, developers. This is a government that represents those who profit from the housing crisis, not those who suffer from it. The big developers and the big landlords. And in this case, what is being sacrificed is renters, disproportionately poorer and lower incomes than people who own their own homes, disproportionately colder, disproportionately having health issues. They're being sacrificed. And the climate's being sacrificed. And I know that you personally do care about the climate, but you go back and you look at what Darragh O'Brien said, and it's just clear the government has abandoned any real commitment. I've had 2 engagements in the last couple of weeks with Micheál Martin post his speech in COP, saying, which is, it's a great idea. You might consider doing some of this telling the truth stuff and following the science and leading and all of that. But they're not interested in it at all. It's one thing to say in Brazil, and then you come home here and just no brain ideas, like ideas that are so simple, ideas that improve people's lives, don't make people's lives harder, improves people's lives radically, and reduce our emissions are now off the table. Why? Because it will involve some costs for landlords. Again, I think the Minister and the SRI are overstating the costs because of the grants and so on that are available. But the impact in terms of the environment is very serious here. Buildings are directly responsible for 40% of energy usage. Operational emissions from the residential sector account for 10% of annual greenhouse gas emissions. We don't have, you refuse to do anything in terms of agriculture. You refuse to do anything in terms of big tech and data centres. You're doing very little in terms of public transport. Here's something you actually could do: improve people's lives in a significant way, make people feel warmer, bring down their energy bills, and you refuse to do this as well. And again and again and again, it's the vested interests at the top that the government refuses to deal with. In terms of the substantial argument that the Minister makes is that unintended consequences, that rents will go up, will make people homeless. In your opening speech, basically you said we'd have to increase capacity of the homeless sector. But that would only be if you took political choices that they should happen. Because, and this all gets me every time we talk about anything to do with the private rental sector, the way the government acts is if we do anything to impact landlords who are making record profits, right? Because rents have tripled in the past 10 years. That money has gone from the pockets of renters and the state, and taxpayers, into the pockets of landlords, right? So they're doing very, very well, and that's clear. But anything that will impact them, we can't do because they might exit the market. But the impression is given that these people are going to take their private rented accommodation that they own, kind of pack it up brick by brick, put it on their backpack and fly away. They can't take their properties away. These are immovable assets. So they cannot reduce our housing stock if the state says, we're going to buy them. If you want to get out of the private rent, you want to get out, fine. We buy it, we increase the housing stock, we give, you get to get out, fine. The tenant gets security of tenure with the state, and the state increases its housing stock. That is a win-win that we should be doing. So it's purely a policy choice to say, well, if we say minimum BER standards, that then that's going to have a negative impact on the rental market. Not if the state steps in and says, we'll have a tenant in situ scheme, we'll properly fund it, and we will buy these properties if landlords want to exit as a consequence. In terms of the more kind of detailed, issues that have been raised, I mean, well, the only one detailed kind of point that's made is, oh, well, the question of timing and is this too much, too fast, or whatever. Like, fine, that's precisely the kind of thing we could discuss in committee. I think we first launched this a year ago. Obviously, time is ticking on and so on. So if that was the government's real objection, that's a discussion we would be open to. We could discuss in committee. You could have amendments to make it slightly slower pace of, but like hiding behind the opposition on those grounds is the reality that you are opposed to any minimum BER standards whatsoever. And like the general direction of travel, of course, is for the government to lower standards in the rental sector, not to increase standards, to say we're going to have smaller, poorer accommodation for renters. And again, it's renters, it's low-income people who are asked to pay the price for like the viability cap, for incentivising more landlords, for all of that just code, giving them, allowing them to make more profit. I just return to the basic point of which I think Rory Hearn made well about, like, this has real costs for individuals and for our society. The health costs are immense. Like, there's a lot of people living in very mouldy accommodation. I mean, we had a huge issue in Tala with one particular housing development. It was an AHB, and like, you went in and just the mold like everywhere. It's just horrendous that people have to live in those circumstances. You've lots of people who have a room in their apartment that they've basically abandoned because it's just kind of, the mold has won in that area and they've had to retreat out of it. Like, the health impact is enormous of that stuff. And the government's basically saying that we're not going to do anything about it. Well, we'll consider doing a few more carrots for the landlords, but if the landlords choose not to take up those carrots, well, then we won't do anything about it. You have a huge number of people living in energy poverty. That's going to get worse because the cost of living crisis hasn't gone away. The bills have not come down. They continue to rise. You have hundreds of thousands of people in arrears on their gas bill, on their electricity bill, and instead of taking an easy win and doing something for all these people in private rented sector and then doing the same in terms of the state's housing stock, the government is refusing to do it because it would be some sort of imposition on landlords. And I do think that basic point is that, like, you can kind of throw all the carrots you like at the landlords, but there's definitely a whole group of landlords who they just want the money to roll in. Like, they don't want to do anything. They actually have to do any work. And like, that's a fundamental problem. And like, we can't ultimately, we have to either compel those landlords to do work, so to ensure that their tenants get to live in a basic standard of decent quality accommodation, or if they're not willing to do it, no problem, but then you don't belong in this business and the state will buy the property off you and the state will provide appropriate accommodation. Anyway, expect to get lots of emails over the coming few days to encourage people to vote in favour of this bill. Thanks.